Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy AA on 220, bringing you guys my D-League Week 8 game versus CJ, coach of the Baltimore Oriolus. Now, this was, as CJ put it, a very close game, very fun game to play versus him. We're back on Showdown. We actually DC'd probably like 2/3 in the match. It was really late at night when we DC'd. It was like near midnight, and we felt like it would just be easier to just play it on Showdown. So this week is on Showdown. I've already done Weeks 9 and 10, actually. They're both on Wi-Fi, so you can get back to the Wi-Fi content, I guess, in terms of D-League for next couple weeks. Also, my internet is finally better. I literally played this game like the night before I upgraded my internet. I know it's better because I actually tested it by leaving my DS connected online accidentally for like 6 hours, and it somehow stayed connected, whereas normally it would time out after 35 minutes, that is, not 35 hours. So we should be finally good for future weeks. In terms of why I bring that up, I guess it sort of explains, at least it to an extent explains some of the earlier plays. I sort of tried, at the very least, if this went up, if I was, let's say, doing a live comm of the actual game, you would have seen I sort of rushed through a lot of my plays. I think they were solid plays, but especially towards the beginning 2/3 of this game, I definitely tried rushing through a lot of my moves, tried just making whatever was like the first play that could remotely work. I just made that play, and that's sort of how I've been playing a lot of my games, just because I've been worried about like timing out and all that. But obviously, as you can see, the past 2 weeks, that clearly hasn't helped. But luckily though, now I at least have more time on my hands, so I don't need to worry about timing out after 35 minutes. In terms of the actual game though, CJ brought Klefki, TerrWRECKion, Raikou, Darmanitan, almost a Drapion there, Mega Lottie, and Swampert. Was a little bit surprised to not see Drapion, as had I brought Toxic Spikes, this team itself would have been really bothered by Toxic Spikes. I felt like things like Raikou, his Darmanitan set especially would have been really bothered. Also, Swampert and TerrWRECKion wouldn't have liked them either. Of course, he did bring 2 immunities still. He has also 1 immunity to actual spikes. This team overall, I felt like, was a little bit surprising. His rocker is very obviously going to be Swampert this week. I don't even know if Klefki is going to be Spikes, to be honest, because, in fact, I don't even know if he brought Spikes and Klefki, to be honest. I know he brought dual screens, but that's all I can really remember of his Klefki spread. In terms of my team, I brought, of course, Donphan, Thundurus, Volcanion, Clefable, Roserade, and Kangaskhan. I know you guys saw that in the team builder. My lead here 100% was going to be Donphan. I felt like his only leads could be either Raikou and he'd pivot out, depending on what I led off with, or maybe even just hard swap, or he'd lead off with Darmanitan, or he'd lead off with Swampert. And I feel like either way, if he lead off with Swampert, I can go hard into either Volcanion or into Roserade, and if he leads off with the other two, I'm fine leading off with Donphan. So my first turn, I lead off with Michelle and our Donphan here, as he leads off with Darmanitan, and he actually goes for a turn 1 taunt. I was a little bit surprised by this. I expected Choice Darmanitan, but now I know obviously he's not going to be Choice Taunt because he was U-turning as well. And he U-turns into Latios. I figured that this is fine. He does, of course, go into Latios as I go for Earthquake. I figured I just wanted to try and kill it if I could. And at this point, I figured I had to swap out. I actually was going to swap hard into Thundurus. I figured Thundy, if he went into anything besides the Raikou, I could probably pivot on it. And if he stayed in with Lottie, I figured that I can just go in and stay and try and click a U-turn, because I didn't anticipate that he'd let me kill off right away in the game. So him going into Darmanitan was pretty nice. I do know for a fact this thing is not scarfed, so I'm pretty free to just pivot right on this. And he actually goes into Swampert here, as I actually just go for a U-turn, and I'm trying to just keep up momentum at this point. I've now also learned that his Swampert is Rocky Helmet, and I go right into Roserade at this point. I figured it was pretty free. He goes into his Lottie here, and I figured that he was most likely going to switch out, so I went for Spikes. I figured that if I can get more Spikes up, eventually he's not going to be able to switch as easily, as his Swampert doesn't have recovery, and he has no possible way to pass any sort of healing into it. His Darmanitan is going to be chipped by my by my Donphan. It's weird. I also kept saying that was Donphan, and that I was running the Darmanitan. I said that several points when I was like playing the game out. I also accidentally put it on my notes as well that it was a Donphan. So that was definitely unfortunate. In terms of the Lottie though, I wasn't really bothered by this thing coming in. I do have plenty of switch-ins. So at this point, I do switch into Clefable. He's not set up already, so I'm perfectly free to go into Clefable, and I'm going to take any hit very well. Realize that this is his defogger. That's perfectly fine by me, as it's one less move that he has to have free on his Lati. So at this point, I figured my best bet is to go into Donphan. I could probably get up rocks, unless if he goes into Darmanitan, of course. I anticipated also that he would probably be going into Darmanitan, as it was really his best way around Clefable because of his Magic Guard. Klefki doesn't really do that much damage unless he's running like Iron Head, because I could have gotten a +1 if I stayed in. And while obviously I can't touch Klefki overly well, I would potentially beat it because I actually have recovery, he doesn't, and I can slowly set up on it. Even if he got up screens, I'm still winning that war in the end. So I knew he sort of had to go into Darmanitan, because he can't switch into TerrWRECKion on me. He could potentially break with like a Groundium Z or a Rockium Z, or even just a Iron Head or Poison Jab. He could do a lot of damage if he's choice Darmanitan. Choice TerrWRECkion, but Darmanitan was his really only good breaker versus Clefable. So I figured that if I went into Donphan, I figured I can get some nice damage off. If he hard swaps here, predicting I'm going to go for Earthquake, since he did go Taunt last time, I get up rocks as well. So at this point, I figured he was probably going to try and pivot on me, maybe even just hard swap because he doesn't know I have Helmet, and go right into Lati, because Lati, of course, is his Earthquake immunity. It's fine. I figured it wasn't worth taking the risk of getting a Brox just yet in the game, because I figured if I can kill off the Darmanitan, if he tries to go for Taunt, that is such a huge threat to me gone, and since he's not choiced, he could potentially still have a Rock-type move, and that could hit Volcanion. And because he's not choiced, I can't exactly hard swap Volcanion either. And while I could potentially rest, while I am asleep, I'm actually losing the war versus Darmanitan, so I would need to hard Cleric. And again, because he's not choiced, I can't rely on him just being locked into Flare Blitz, so I would need to worry about that. So I really just want to kill that thing off as soon as possible, or at the very least try and find his moveset and see what my ideal situation would be. Because he went into Lati here, I'm pretty free to go into Playable. I figured it's definitely my best bet. He actually goes for a Shadow Ball here. It ends up doing like no damage. I realized that he literally has no way to touch the Clefable this week. So Clefable is essentially going to be really solid versus versus the Mega Lati, as he's probably gonna have recovery as well in that Lati. And then his fourth move is probably gonna be some sort of stab or some sort of move to hit the rest of my team, whether that's a Dragon or Psychic type move. Him bringing in Darmanitan here is fine, because I am pretty free at this point to just go for a Psyshock. He doesn't have great switch-ins because it would have bothered TerrWRECkion. Obviously, if his Raikou was AV, that would have hurt it more. I didn't anticipate he'd stay in, and not only that, but this also isn't resisted, whereas Moonblast would have been. So I figured that Psyshock was probably my best bet in terms of a play to click. At this point, I go into Donphan here, as he actually goes for a Toxic here. So he probably predicted me to switch. I don't see why he would have Toxic Clefable, as it should be fairly obvious with just the way I've been playing it that I'm probably going to be unaware. Even if it wasn't at this point, I'm not sure why he wouldn't have just clicked Flare Blitz there, as it would have done a ton of damage to Clefable. So at this point, the Toxic was of course really solid. It's of course going to wear down a normal Donphan. However, luckily for us, we are actually Rest. That's going to help a lot this week in terms of my matchup versus the Darmanitan. So he is actually going to U-turn here, of course, taking more Rocky Helmet damage. That's perfectly fine. I decide here he is probably going to swap into Lati again, because I've went Earthquake every time he's brought in the Lati, and I'm just going to get up rocks at this point. I figured that it's not that big of a deal, and I'm just going to go right back into Clefable, because I figured I could potentially try and get up a Calm Mind at this point. And even if basically my play here, I had a few options. I got a Calm Mind, of course. I could have just attacked what was in front of me with Moonblast. I figured that ultimately my best bet was to try and play off of Darmanitan coming in again. He cannot OHKO me at this point. I can get off a higher damage Psyshock. In hindsight, I don't know why I didn't just attack twice, because even if Klefki came in, for example, and I had just hard swapped out, at the very least attacking twice would have gotten off more damage on Darmanitan. However, he does go into Klefki here. That's fine. I get a free switch into Donphan. Literally, unless if he has Magnet Rise in this set, my Donphan should be fine taking it out. So he's actually getting up his screens here at this point. Perfectly fine by me. I'm actually going to take advantage of this and go for a rest, because I figured off that with my rest, I'm pretty free to just get Donphan to a healthy HP to 1v1 Darmanitan. So I was perfectly fine with that. And at this point, I do go into Roserade, because I figured that Klefki can't really touch me that well, and I can Cleric off my rest, that way then Donphan can be more efficient later on in the game. He, of course, goes for a sub here, taking advantage of my turn of going for Aromatherapy. So very, very solid on my opponent's part. And now at this point, I'm in a little bit of a tough position, but it's not overly bad, because he does have a sub here. If he goes for Sub Calm Mind, that's a little bit scary. But of course, I do still have Mega Kang, and Mega Kang can actually do a lot of damage at this point. because he is behind a sub at this point, but he doesn't have any way to boost his Fizz Def, and even at +1, I'm still going to be able to take a few hits from this thing. He is doing a little more damage than I would have liked, of course, but I am able to get off 2 Earthquakes because I'm breaking his sub, of course. Parental Bond is an amazing ability. So not only that, but his Reflect has worn off at this point, so he's now actually in range of Earthquake from Mega Kang to kill him. And if he got a lower roll than he did last time, then his Raikou would have been at risk for sure. So he does bring in, of course, the Mega Swamp, the regular Swampert here. As I actually go for a Wish, I figured that he probably wasn't going to stay in because his Reflect was gone, and he was at risk of losing Raikou, which is his by far best way of breaking Volcanion. And especially my Volcanion spread that I brought this week, it could have definitely handled his team really well in terms of what is here. Things like TerrWRECKion, if I have a sub up, Darmanitan, I can Toxic the Lottie, of course, and also the Swampert I can beat 1v1, I can beat the Klefki 1v1. So he really does need Raikou left. It's also a really solid pivot for him to get initiative, as everything else besides Darmanitan is dead weight in terms of trying to get pivot initiative and to keep the upper hand. So he does bring in a Swampert here. I actually go for the Body Slams. It's not that big of a deal. Originally, in the original game, I paralyzed here. Really doesn't matter. You'll see why later on in the game. It does not make a single difference at all. So at this point, my Kangaskhan is, of course, really low. I'm perfectly fine with that, as my Wish is actually going to come in for me. And I'm going to get myself up to a decent HP to switch back in later. And I can freely hard swap in a Roserade at this point. I figured that he's definitely going to switch, of course. And I figured that I'm pretty free to just play around this. He actually goes hard into TerrWRECKion and then back into Klefki. I figured that that was him just trying to get around the Giga Drain, of course, because even if he set up there, I would have still been in range to take anything from 100% full, unless if he was Ground EMZ. And I could have been pretty free to just Giga Drain it twice and live the hits and take it out, because I would have been slower, so I would have got myself up to a respectable HP, and at full, it was pretty much a guaranteed roll that I lived a +2 Earthquake, especially if he wasn't max attack, which he very well might have just went for a bulky TerrWRECKion, but even then I would have 2-hit KO'd. Of course, him going Klefki here was a very, very solid play, as he's going to take like no damage from Giga Drain, and I have no way to hit this thing, as I expect a Magnet Rise to potentially come first spread, but it's clearly showing that he does not have Magnet Rise Klefki, which is if anything better for us. So I do bring in Donphan here though, as I know he's just going to set up screens again. It's by far his best play. It's his really only play, to be honest. And he goes back into Mega Lottie at this point. Perfectly fine by me, as I am free to just go for Rapid Spin. It's going to force him to now definitely want to defog, which is going to give me a free switch. Surprisingly though, he actually goes into Raikou. I anticipated he was just going to go for a defog and just try and clear hazards. However, me going into Clefable here on this play anyway is perfectly fine, because I'm pretty free to just go for a Calm Mind. Even if he gets up a sub, I have Psyshock around his Calm Mind potentially, and he really does not have a way to break me at this point. So I'm pretty free to just Calm Mind up versus this thing and try and break some of his team down at this point. So I go for Psyshock here, because at +1, I'm able to do a decent amount of damage to get this thing taken care of. I figured even if he just like crit me, for example, with Thunderbolt, I'm still going to live it, and I could potentially soft boil up next turn. So he is now in range of one more Psyshock. However, I do not want to risk Clefable getting to a really low HP count. So of course he's going to Thunderbolt again, as I'm actually going to go for a soft boiled. I figured now I can also Calm Mind yet again and get myself up to a higher HP, or I can even just kill this thing off with Psyshock potentially. So he's going to go for more Thunderbolts. That's fine. I go for Psyshock. I figured I can kill this thing off. I'd probably need to switch out anyway after this turn, regardless, even if I got to +6 potentially, because things like TerrWRECKion with Z-Move could have still pressured me out fairly well, and he would have always had the upper hand in terms of getting off a hit. And also, eventually, he would have just swapped out anyway, I felt like. So he is going to Lottie here, as I actually go, after TerrWRECKion, he doubles into Lottie as I went into Donphan. I figured it was my best switch in. And then now that he brings in Lottie here, of course, yet again, after I bring in my Donphan, I decide that I'm going to be bringing in Clefable as, of course, my best switch in. I figured I could soft boil up versus this thing, as his best way to hit me is going to be Shadow Ball. So at this point, I'm pretty free to just bring Clef. He actually goes for a defog here, as I am now in a good position with Clef, of course, as he's at my mercy. Bring in things like Darmanitan, of course. I'm free to just go for a Calm Mind. I figured he probably cannot break me at this point, because he is showing that he's leftovers, and most likely he does not break me. But just in case, I do want to go into Donphan, as it's really nice if he does go for a Flare Blitz to just go into Donphan here and have him take Helmet and Recoil. At this point in the game, I also do realize his Darmanitan cannot possibly touch my Volcanion. And while he could potentially Toxic me, of course, if I can get a sub up versus this thing, I am 100% taking this thing on. So I'm now no longer worried about Darmanitan either, because he has shown that he's Toxic, Taunt, U-Turn, Flare Blitz. So really his only Mon left at this point in the game that could even take on my Volcanion would be his TerrWRECkion. And if I can clear TerrWRECkion, I can win with a Volcanion. Even if I can keep a sub up versus it, I can still Scald, which is very nice for later on in the game. So my win con at this point is essentially it's essentially Donphan plus Volcanion. He does go into Lottie here as I go for a rest. I figured that I need to keep Darmanitan as healthy as possible. So at this point, he goes into Darmanitan, taking advantage of me being rested up. It's fine. I go into Thundurus here. Very, very easy play for me, as he is forced to switch out here 100%, as he needs Darmanitan too badly to break things like Clefable. And I go for Thunder Punch. Figured if he brings in Swampert at this point, I am pretty free to Grass Knot up, because I do know he's Rocky Helmet and does not have a Rindo Berry. He's going to die. And if he plays around it, so what? Whatever he brings in next is not going to like to take on my Thundurus either, because if he brings in his Darmanitan, I'm free to Thunder Punch. If he brings in Lottie, Dark NEMZ. If he brings in TerrWRECkion, Grass Knot's a 2-hit KO anyway. And if he brings in Klefki, I'm beating a 1v1 with Thunder Punch. So at this point, I was pretty free with Thundurus. He does go into Swampert, of course, and I am just going to go for a Grass Knot and kill this thing off. This is why I said the paralysis not hitting this time around didn't really matter, because 100% that would have killed anyway, even if he wasn't paralyzed, of course, like he was now, it would have taken care of that. If he was paralyzed, I would have still taken care of it. It's really not changing anything in terms of that aspect. So he now brings in his Klefki here. I figured, well, I can definitely beat this thing 1v1. I didn't necessarily want to just sit here and just deal like 12% to Klefki with the screens up. So I go into Roserade here. I figured I could always Spike Stack versus him, and it's going to force him to defog with Lottie, of course, which does allow me to also get a free switch into Clefable. Not only that, but I could also Aromatherapy here, and I can go into my Donphan later on versus Darmanitan. So at this point, though, I was originally going to just set up spikes and just get triple spikes versus him, but I figured that at this point in the game, if I get a sub up with Volcanion, I'm going to force in something that needs to break me, like either Lottie with Dragon type move, or like Psychic Points, Lottie with Stab, or plan B, he brings in TerrWRECkion. Either way, very, very disadvantageous for him, because I could Toxic the Lottie and I could Scald the TerrWRECkion. So of course he does hard swap his Darmanitan here, as I actually hard swap my Volcanion as well same turn, and he now goes for the U-turn, which is perfectly fine. It's doing no damage, as you could see, and he goes right into Lottie. I figured I am pretty free to sub up, because no matter what, it's putting me in the upper hand here, as I can not only protect and try and just get some more leftovers back, but I can also just Toxic this. If he brought in TerrWRECkion, if I Toxic that, that's fine as well. Even if I just Scald it, that's fine. He really has nothing left that wants to take this thing on at this point, or at the very least take a hit from this thing behind a sub, because even Lottie, for example, right here is now Toxic, so this thing is now on a timer, of course. Even if he does have recovery, he is going to be put in a really bad position. I'm going for Protect just to make sure that I can get more toxic damage off, and I can try and play around whatever move he goes for. He goes to the Shadow Ball here, that's fine. I figured that this is a good sign for me to be able to just switch in my Mega Kang here, because even if he goes for a Dragon type move, I can pick this thing off with Sucker Punch. Even if he goes for a Roost, he's going to be putting himself off on a timer, so he can just spam Defog and Roost all he wants. He's going to kill himself off. So I figured Lottie was a pretty free grab with Sucker Punch at this point. So Lottie is now gone. I'm in a really good position for myself, 6-3. I figured at this point in the game, I don't really need Kang anymore, so I actually just sack. I figured that if he goes for a setup turn there, I'm in a pretty bad position, but if I just go for Earthquake here, I can kill this thing off with Earthquake plus Sucker Punch. So I figured that was really solid for me. Not only that, but Donphan was at full anyway, so Donphan could always pick this thing off later had I just stayed in Earthquake no matter what. So I figured my play was to sack there. So bye-bye Kang, of course, no 6-0, but I figured that was definitely the better play. I now do bring in Donphan here, as I'm pretty free to just click Earthquake no matter what. There is no possible switching he has at this thing at this point. Everything is ground weak. So he does now decide he's going to go into Klefki, of course, and he's going to be just getting up screens. His best way around me, of course. That is perfectly fine by me. He is also Shucka Berry, so he's actually going to chew that hit really well. Again, perfectly fine by me. He is also going for Foul Play here. And I figure that he's going to just kill himself off here. So this leads to a little bit of a questionable play. I figured that my best play here was to just go for a rest. I figured I can take advantage of this later on. However, I also forgot that I'm pretty free to just get up Rocks here at this turn as well. And not only that, but had I got for Rocks here instead, I would have been able to get TerrWRECkion to a point where he would have taken enough recoil between my helmet, and also I could have Earthquaked him. He would have came on Rocks, and I could have picked this thing off with like Thundurus later on as well. So this is a little questionable. I actually decided I'm going to go for a rest here because I figured he's going to kill himself off of foul play regardless. And I figured I got myself up full, I keep a sturdy up, I could run a therapy later on. Worst comes to worst, I win only 4-0 instead of 5-0. So of course he does bring in his TerrWRECkion here. And I figured I'm going to hard top into Thundy, because if he just kills me off, that's fine. If he sets up with Swords Dance, I'm free to get a Grass Knot off at least. So he does to go for the Swords Dance route. I figured I'm just going to go for Grass Knot. Does a little less damage than I would have liked, of course. So that's very unfortunate for me. So I do, of course, take a close combat. I was trying to see if he might have had Stone Edge or not, as that would have been really easily for me to play around potentially if I knew if he had it or not. I go into Akiza here. I figure that if his best way of close combat to hit me, he also has SD, of course. He probably has Rock Polish, I figured, for the Thundy. And his last move could be like Earthquake or Stone Edge. If it's Stone Edge, I choose this thing. Otherwise, I'm fine. He actually goes for a Z power here and goes for Z Continental Crush. And that is enough to take me out, actually. So that's very unfortunate, of course. So now I'm in a little bit of an uphill position. Had I been an Unaware Clef here instead of Magic Guard, I would have won the game, because he couldn't have broken me. I could have killed him off with Moonblast. So again, a little bit of a choke and prep, but to be fair, I shouldn't have rested up with Donphan anyway, as of course I could have just stayed and clicked Earthquake and won. So that's very unfortunate, of course. He's just going to go for a Stone Edge at this point. And now I have 2 Mons left. Of course, Donphan is asleep, and he is going to go for close combat. And because of that, he is going to take some helmet damage, of course. It's not going to be enough, though, because I wasn't able to get myself back up in terms of HP count. So not only that, but he's going to miss the Stone Edge here. Again, perfectly fine for him because I'm still asleep. If he misses another Stone Edge, then I win the game. But of course he hits a Stone Edge. So that's very unfortunate. We have now lost the game because Volcanion is of course going to die to a close combat. So very good game to CJ. Of course, I really shouldn't have won for rest there. In hindsight, that was definitely a throw. I should have also brought Unaware Clef. That could have been a nice catch in terms of winning the game later on at this point. So very, very unfortunate. I'm looking to redeem myself next week versus Melon. This is a game I really thought I could have won, to be honest. I think I could have still won it had I not choked. And it could have been a high differential win too, which I really could have used in terms of trying to get playoffs. At this point, I'm just trying to get another win. I don't want to go out like 2-9. That would be horrible. But we still do have 3 more games versus Melon, Zazo, and Leo in that order. My game versus Melon will be up next week. If you guys did enjoy it, leave a like down below, and I am looking forward to seeing you guys next time. Peace out.